The smell of leather and old books filled the federal courthouse as I sat across from District Judge Jamie, showing him evidence of HOA corruption. Then my phone buzzed, a security alert that made my blood run cold. There on the screen, Brenda Thornwick, our HOA president, forcing her way into my lake cabin 200 miles away. The sound of splintering wood came through my phone's speaker as she kicked in the back door. Judge Jamie leaned over to watch. Is that happening right now? Brenda had no idea federal agents were already positioned around my property. No idea the judge was watching her commit breaking and entering in real time. And she definitely had no idea that her 3-year campaign to terrorize military families was about to land her in federal prison. You see, when you mess with the wrong veteran's home while he's meeting with a federal judge about your crimes, well, that's what we call perfect timing. What would you do if your HOA president broke into your property while you were building a federal case against them? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I bet some of you have dealt with HOA tyrants too. My name is Marcus Kelly, and 6 months ago I thought I'd found paradise. After 30 years in telecommunications engineering and a decent payout from some patents I'd developed, I retired early to restore my grandfather's lake cabin in Pine Lake, Montana. The place had been in our family since 1967, weathered cedar walls, a hand-built stone fireplace, and a dock that stretched into water so clear you could see trout swimming 20 feet down. The morning coffee always tasted better there, steam rising from my mug as loons called across the still water, that creaking sound of the old dock under my boots. Pure peace. My wife Sarah loved the idea of turning it into a retreat center for veterans, and our teenage daughter Emma claimed the loft bedroom overlooking the lake. Then I met Brenda Thornwick. Picture a woman who treats a leather folder like a weapon and drives a white SUV so pristine you'd think it was factory fresh daily. Brenda had been the HOA president for 6 years, ran a local real estate office, and had the kind of sharp features that seemed permanently arranged in disapproval. The day she introduced herself, I caught a whiff of her expensive perfume mixing with the pine scent somehow. Even nature smelled less authentic around her. "Welcome to Pine Lake," she said, though her tone suggested I wasn't particularly welcome at all. "I trust you'll familiarize yourself with our community standards." Community standards. That should have been my first red flag. 3 weeks later, I got my introduction to Brenda's version of standards. A certified letter arrived, thick, official-looking paper that felt expensive between my fingers. Inside, a $1,500 fine for unauthorized structure modifications. The violation? My grandfather's dock extension, built in 1972. "Recent satellite imaging has revealed non-compliant structures on your property," Brenda explained when I called. I could hear her manicured nails tapping against her desk. "All waterfront modifications require current HOA approval." Here's the thing that made this particularly ridiculous. The HOA wasn't even formed until 1985. My grandfather's dock predated their organization by 13 years. I had the original building permits, survey documents, even photos of him and my dad fishing off that dock when I was 10 years old. You'd think presenting historical evidence would solve the problem, right? Wrong. I showed up to the next HOA meeting armed with documentation. The community center smelled like burnt coffee and floor wax, fluorescent lights humming overhead as maybe 15 people sat in folding chairs. I laid out the photos, the permits, the timeline proving my dock was grandfathered in. Brenda barely glanced at my evidence. "Grandfathered structures require annual compliance fees," she announced, like she was reading the weather forecast. $500 monthly for historical structure maintenance assessment. $6,000 a year. For a dock that was perfectly legal when it was built. That's when I started noticing the pattern. During the meeting, I caught whispered conversations from other residents, always stopping when Brenda looked their way. An elderly neighbor named Gladys quietly mentioned she'd seen similar problems with other military families. After the meeting, I did some digging. 3 veteran families had faced escalating fines in the past 2 years. 2 had sold their properties, coincidentally. Both sales were handled by Brenda's real estate company. The diesel smell from the parking lot mixed with my growing suspicion as I sat in my truck afterward. This wasn't about dock compliance or community standards. This was about pushing out veterans. Here's what I wish I'd known then. When an HOA suddenly discovers violations on properties owned by people from specific backgrounds, you're not dealing with bureaucracy, you're dealing with discrimination. and discrimination, especially against veterans, can become a federal crime. But I was about to learn that lesson the hard way. 2 weeks after that community meeting, Brenda escalated things. She showed up at my cabin unannounced on a Tuesday morning, clipboard in hand, and a guy she introduced as Dale, supposedly a county inspector. The smell of stale cigarette smoke mixed with cheap aftershave preceded them up my gravel driveway. Dale looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, constantly glancing at Brenda like a nervous dog waiting for commands. His county inspector badge hung crooked on a shirt that had definitely seen better decades. "Routine safety inspection," Brenda announced, brushing past me without waiting for permission. "We've received multiple complaints about electrical hazards near the water." Multiple complaints? From who? I was the only one using this property. I followed them around my cabin, watching Dale point at perfectly legal GFCI outlets, the kind specifically designed for outdoor use near water. Every time he'd hesitate, Brenda would clear her throat and tap her pen against that leather folder. The metallic clicking sound made my teeth clench. "This outlet's dangerously close to the waterline," Dale mumbled, photographing a GFCI that was actually 15 feet from the shoreline and completely up to code. I'd installed it myself using my electrical engineering background. "And this fire pit," Brenda added with theatrical concern, gesturing to my grandfather's weathered stone circle, "appears to be completely unpermitted." I almost laughed. Unpermitted? It was a ring of field stones my grandfather had arranged by hand in the 1960s. I had photos of 3 generations of our family roasting marshmallows around those same rocks. But Brenda wasn't interested in family history. The violation list grew like a cancer. $1,500 for electrical non-compliance, $1,200 for the unpermitted recreational fire feature, $1,500 for failure to maintain adequate waterfront safety standards, plus $300 monthly monitoring fees to ensure ongoing compliance. Total financial damage, $4,200, with $300 bleeding out every month thereafter. That night, I couldn't sleep. The injustice gnawed at my gut like bad coffee. So I did what any former telecom engineer would do. I researched. Montana requires all building inspectors to carry state certification, with licenses publicly searchable online through the Department of Labor. Dale's name? Nowhere to be found. But Dale Morrison, real estate agent at Thornwick Properties? Bingo. My dad always told me that when someone's trying to screw you over, they usually get sloppy. Turns out fake building inspectors leave digital footprints just like everyone else. I'd learned that lesson working with contractors over the years. Always verify credentials before trusting someone's authority over your property. I filed a complaint with the state licensing board first thing Wednesday morning. Then I got strategic. Every interaction with Brenda from that point forward would happen via email. No more phone calls where she could deny what was said or twist my words later. But Brenda's campaign was just getting started. Within days, anonymous noise complaints started appearing about my restoration work, perfectly legal work happening between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Fresh parking restrictions materialized overnight with signs that seemed specifically designed to make accessing my property inconvenient. The sound of Brenda's heels clicking on asphalt became my early warning system. She'd patrol the neighborhood like a corrections officer, always carrying that leather folder, always photographing something. That's when I made the decision that changed everything. Security cameras. I installed a discrete system covering my driveway, dock, and the public areas where Brenda liked to conduct her surveillance. The first week of footage was better than Christmas morning. There was Brenda, 11 p.m. on a Thursday, measuring my dock with Dale holding a flashlight. They photographed it from multiple angles, clearly building a case for additional violations. But here's what made my blood run cold. They weren't just documenting my property. I watched them perform identical late-night inspections at 3 other houses, all owned by veterans. 2 weeks of footage revealed the pattern. Brenda's pristine white SUV made regular midnight stops at properties belonging to military families. She'd photograph, measure, and document during hours when she assumed no one was watching. But the smoking gun came from enhanced audio on a particularly clear recording. Brenda stood in my driveway at midnight, phone pressed to her ear. "The Kelly property should be straightforward," she said to someone. "These military types always crack under sustained pressure. A few more violations and he'll be desperate to sell below market value." The diesel smell from her SUV lingered in my driveway long after she drove away, but now it smelled like evidence. I had footage of systematic harassment, fake inspections, and discriminatory targeting based on veteran status. Time to turn the tables. Armed with evidence of Brenda's midnight surveillance operation, I thought I had her cornered. I was wrong. Instead of backing down, she doubled down with legal intimidation. The certified letter arrived on expensive law firm letterhead, the kind of thick, embossed paper designed to make your hands shake when you open it. "Cease and desist all unauthorized activities," screamed across the top in bold letters that seemed to leap off the page. The threat was crystal clear. Pay $7,800 in accumulated fines within 30 days, or face a lien on my property. Not only had my original violations allegedly grown through compounding daily penalties, but they'd added new charges for ongoing noncompliance and failure to respond to official HOA communications. The smell of fresh ink and legal intimidation filled my kitchen as I read every word twice. But something felt off about the whole thing. The law firm Hartwell & Associates had a Helena address, but when I Googled them, their website looked like it was built in 2003 and abandoned. That afternoon, I drove to the county courthouse, a limestone building that smelled like decades of bureaucracy and floor wax. I'd spent enough years dealing with municipal permits to know that real legal threats leave paper trails. In the dusty basement records room, I found what I was looking for: the original HOA formation documents from 1985. As I photographed page after page with my phone, the musty smell of old files making me sneeze, I discovered something interesting. The current CC&Rs, those covenants, conditions, and restrictions that supposedly gave Brenda all this power, were significantly different from the original documents. Major changes had been made over the years, including the creation of the historical structure assessment that was costing me $500 monthly. But here's what made my pulse quicken. Those amendments required approval from 75% of homeowners. I found meeting minutes, voting records, even proxy statements. Most of Brenda's rule changes had been passed by tiny majorities, often with less than half the community even present. My grandfather had taught me to read contracts carefully during his construction days. "The devil's in the details," he used to say, "and the angels are in the original signatures." Turns out invalid rule changes are just expensive toilet paper when they hit federal court. But my investigation was about to uncover something much bigger. I started reaching out to the displaced veteran families, the ones who'd been forced to sell under Brenda's harassment campaigns. Pete Michaels, a Desert Storm vet, had been driven out 6 months earlier. Same playbook, Pete told me over coffee at a diner that smelled like bacon grease and regret. Started with dock violations, then electrical complaints, then suddenly I'm looking at 12 grand in fines for a shed my father-in-law built in 1992. Pete's voice cracked slightly. Sold for $180,000 just to escape the legal bills. 3 months later, Brenda's company flipped it for $320,000. The pattern was becoming undeniable. Find a veteran family. Manufacture violations. Escalate fines until financial pressure forces a sale below market value. Resell through Brenda's real estate network for massive profits. I filed complaints with the State Real Estate Commission documenting the conflict of interest between Brenda's HOA enforcement and her property sales business. But she wasn't waiting for regulatory investigations. My mailbox got spray painted with "Troublemaker" in red letters that looked like blood against the white metal. Anonymous notes appeared under my windshield wipers. "Military types don't belong in family neighborhoods," and "some people never learn when they're not wanted." The psychological warfare was working on my family. Emma started asking if we could move back to town. Sarah would flinch every time a car door slammed in our driveway. The peaceful retreat we'd planned was becoming a combat zone. But the final escalation came when I discovered someone had tried to break into my cabin. I was in town buying supplies when my security system sent an alert to my phone. The footage showed Brenda's white SUV parked at the far end of our street, engine running like a getaway car. Someone had approached my back door. The camera angle didn't show who, but fresh scratches around the lock and displaced gravel told the story. They'd tried to get inside my home. That night, reviewing the footage with Sarah, we both noticed something chilling. The attempted break-in happened exactly during the hours when Brenda knew I'd be in town, information she could only have gotten by systematically monitoring my routines. "This isn't about money anymore," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is personal." She was right. But what Brenda didn't know was that her escalating harassment had caught the attention of someone with real power to stop her. 3 days after the attempted break-in, Brenda played her nuclear option. A notice appeared in every mailbox around Pine Lake cheap paper with smudged ink that betrayed the rushed, desperate nature of her plan. Emergency HOA meeting addressing disruptive residents threatening community safety. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 2 p.m., middle of a workday when most reasonable people would be at their jobs. The agenda was buried in legal jargon, but the message was clear. They wanted to vote on foreclosing my property for pattern of violations endangering community welfare. I spent Tuesday night reaching out to every neighbor I could trust, making discreet phone calls after Sarah and Emma went to bed. The whispered conversations painted a disturbing picture. Gladys, the elderly woman who lived 2 doors down, revealed something that made my stomach drop. My Harold. God rest his soul went through the same thing before he passed, she said, her voice trembling over the phone. Korean War veteran, decorated soldier. They said his workshop violated noise ordinances, claimed his American flag was too big for community standards. The stress. She couldn't finish the sentence. Harold had died of a heart attack 6 months into his fight with Brenda. Thursday arrived with the kind of gray Montana sky that feels heavy with approaching storms. The community center reeked of industrial disinfectant and stale coffee, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry wasps. Folding chairs were arranged to minimize seating, a deliberate attempt to keep attendance low. 12 people showed up out of 40 homeowners. Brenda had stacked the deck with her allies, Dale, 2 real estate agents from her office, and several residents who'd received mysterious reductions in their own HOA fines the week before. Thank you all for coming to address this serious matter, Brenda began, standing behind a podium like she was delivering a sermon. Her presentation slides looked professional, too professional for an emergency community meeting. She'd prepared a whole show, aerial photos of my property with red circles around alleged violations, charts showing declining property values in our section, and testimonials from concerned residents about my aggressive behavior and disruptive construction activities. But the most damaging slide made my blood boil. It showed a photo of me in my army dress uniform from Emma's school career day, overlaid with text reading, "Military training, asset or liability in family communities." The implication was crystal clear. Veterans were inherently dangerous. Studies show that military personnel often struggle with civilian integration, Brenda continued, her voice taking on a concerned, almost pitying tone. While we appreciate their service, we must prioritize the safety and stability of our families. I sat in the back row, legally recording everything on my phone. Montana's one-party consent law was about to become very important. Every discriminatory word, every fabricated claim, every violation of my civil rights was being documented. When Brenda called for community input, 3 neighbors spoke in my defense. Tom Rivera, a retired teacher, testified that I'd helped repair his dock after spring flooding. Margaret Jamie mentioned my volunteer work with the local VFW. Even shy Mrs. Patterson stood up to say my restoration work was bringing beauty back to our lake. But Brenda had prepared for dissent. She produced a folder of witness statements, typed documents claiming I'd threatened board members, disturbed the peace with loud power tools at inappropriate hours, and made suspicious modifications to my property that could endanger neighbors. I recognized Dale's signature on 2 statements. The others were signed by people who'd received those mysterious fine reductions. If we don't act decisively, Brenda declared, her voice rising to what sounded like practiced hysteria, we'll face lawsuits from other homeowners for failing to maintain community standards. Property values will plummet. Families will be forced to relocate. The vote was predetermined through parliamentary manipulation. They excluded my vote as the subject of enforcement action, counted abstentions as supporting foreclosure, and rushed the process before anyone could raise procedural objections. 8 votes for foreclosure, 4 against. But here's what Brenda didn't know. My phone had captured something beyond her fabricated evidence and procedural violations. During a brief recess, thinking the recording had stopped, she'd leaned over to Dale and whispered something that would change everything. Military people bring down neighborhoods, everyone knows that. Once we clear out the Kellys and that Martinez family, we can market this as an upscale family community. No more PTSD cases or government dependency problems. The room felt dead quiet after the vote, like the moment before thunder follows lightning. I stood up slowly, phone still recording. "I appreciate everyone's time today," I said calmly. "I'll be appealing this decision through proper legal channels, of course. But I want you all to know discrimination against veterans is a federal crime, and everything said here today is now part of an official record." Brenda's face went pale, but she recovered quickly. "Empty threats won't change a lawful vote, Mr. Kelly." As I walked toward the door, Harold's widow Gladys quietly pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand. Written in shaky handwriting was a phone number and 5 words. "Call him. He can help." The phone number Gladys gave me led to the most important conversation of my life. "Marcus, this is Judge William Jamie. Gladys told me you might call." I nearly dropped my coffee mug. Harold's quiet widow had connected me to a federal district judge, her son-in-law. "Judge, I appreciate you taking my call, but I'm not sure this rises to federal—" "Stop right there," he interrupted, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "I've been monitoring HOA discrimination patterns across Montana for the past 18 months. Your case isn't isolated, Mr. Kelly. It's part of something much bigger." That Friday morning, I found myself in Judge Jamie's chambers in Helena, surrounded by law books and the weight of real justice. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across files marked confidential that covered his desk. 23 HOAs across Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming, he explained, spreading out a map dotted with red pins. All showing identical patterns of targeting military families. Same escalation tactics, same financial pressure campaigns, same forced sales below market value. My hands trembled slightly as he showed me federal subpoenas already issued for financial records from Thornwick Properties and 24 similar operations. The scope was staggering, hundreds of veteran families systematically driven from their homes. "The interesting thing about your situation, Marcus, is the timing. We've been building this case for months, but we needed someone still actively fighting back, someone with evidence and the courage to wear a wire." A wire? Federal witness protection. RICO charges for racketeering. The legal terms swirled around me like debris in a tornado, but one fact cut through the confusion. I wasn't crazy. This wasn't normal HOA bureaucracy. It was organized criminal conspiracy. Brenda's operation has generated roughly $2.3 million in profits from forced veteran property sales over 3 years, Judge Jamie continued, his finger tracing financial documents that made my stomach clench. Email chains between her and partners in 6 states discuss clearing out military problems and upgrading neighborhood demographics. The smoking gun was an email thread titled Operation Clean Sweep that read like something from a 1950s segregation handbook. Brenda and her network had developed a systematic playbook for targeting veteran families, identify military backgrounds through public records, manufacture violations using fake inspectors, escalate financial pressure through compounding fines, then swoop in with below-market purchase offers through shell companies. "Your midnight surveillance footage was the missing piece," Judge Jamie explained. "Combined with the discriminatory statements you recorded at yesterday's meeting, we have enough for federal civil rights charges, mail fraud, and RICO conspiracy." But here's what made my pulse race. They wanted me to keep fighting publicly while federal agents worked behind the scenes. "Continue appearing vulnerable. Let Brenda think she's winning. We need her to escalate further. The more desperate she becomes, the more evidence she'll create." He handed me a business card for Assistant U.S. Attorney Janet Morrison. "Call her Monday. She'll explain how federal witness protection works and what we need from you over the next few weeks." As I drove back toward Pine Lake, the Montana landscape looked different through my windshield. Those mountains weren't just beautiful anymore. They were hiding a federal investigation that would expose corruption across 3 states. The scattered ranches and small towns weren't just rural communities. They were evidence in a case that could reshape how HOAs operate nationwide. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "How did the meeting go?" I smiled for the first time in months. Better than expected. Much better. That night, as loons called across Pine Lake and Emma practiced guitar in the loft, I sat on my grandfather's dock watching sunset paint the water gold and red. The same dock Brenda wanted to fine me into bankruptcy over. Tomorrow I'd put on a performance act, defeated, desperate, ready to give up. But tonight, I was just a veteran who'd found allies with the power to fight back against systematic discrimination. The federal government was about to remind Brenda Thornwick that some battles are bigger than HOA bylaws. Monday morning at the Helena Federal Building felt like entering a different world. Marble hallways echoed with the footsteps of serious people doing serious work, and the smell of industrial-strength coffee mixed with the weight of federal authority. Assistant U.S. Attorney Janet Morrison looked like she could prosecute a tax evader and run a marathon on the same day. Her office walls were covered with commendations, photographs with senators, and a framed newspaper headline, "Federal Prosecutor Breaks Massive Insurance Fraud Ring." "Mr. Kelly, you're about to become part of the largest HOA corruption investigation in U.S. history," she said, sliding a thick folder across her desk. Operation Clean Sweep, we borrowed Brenda's own terminology, involves 47 defendants across 6 states. The scope was breathtaking. FBI financial crimes agents had been tracking money laundering through real estate transactions for 8 months. Civil rights investigators were documenting systematic discrimination against protected classes. Even the IRS was involved, pursuing tax evasion charges on unreported profits from forced property sales. "Your role is crucial," Morrison continued. "We need Brenda to escalate her harassment while federal surveillance documents every violation. Think of yourself as bait in a very sophisticated trap." The technical setup was like something from a spy movie. FBI electronics specialists fitted me with a recording device so small it looked like a shirt button. High-definition cameras were installed around my property using a fake utility maintenance crew. Even I couldn't spot them once they were positioned. Agent Sarah Kim from the Financial Crimes Unit explained how they'd been tracking Brenda's money trail. Bank records showed systematic patterns: HOA fines collected through shell companies, property purchases made through limited liability corporations, profits laundered through multiple real estate transactions. "She's been careful, but not careful enough," Agent Kim said, pointing to spreadsheets that looked like evidence of organized crime. "The same LLC that collects your fines owns the company that wants to buy your property at below market value. That's textbook racketeering." My job was deceptively simple: continue acting like a desperate homeowner fighting alone while federal agents gathered final evidence. Every conversation with Brenda would be recorded. Every harassment incident would be documented by professional surveillance teams. Every financial transaction would be tracked through federal banking monitors. But I wasn't really alone anymore. The community network Gladys had quietly built over months was more extensive than I'd realized. Harold's military buddies from 3 wars had been watching, waiting, documenting Brenda's discrimination campaign with the patience of career soldiers. Vietnam veteran Chuck Martinez had been keeping detailed logs of every suspicious HOA enforcement action for 2 years. Korea veteran Bill Patterson had photographed Brenda's midnight surveillance activities using night vision equipment from his security business. Even Desert Storm veteran Linda Foster had been secretly recording HOA meetings on a device her son bought her. "We've all been waiting for someone with the courage to fight back publicly," Chuck told me over dinner at his kitchen table, the aroma of his wife's enchiladas mixing with the serious business of building a federal case. "Harold died fighting these bastards alone. You're not going to." The legal strategy was elegant in its complexity. RICO charges would dismantle Brenda's entire network, allowing federal seizure of all assets gained through criminal enterprise. Civil rights violations carried mandatory minimum sentences that would put conspirators in federal prison for years. Mail fraud charges, using postal service to deliver intimidating legal documents based on fabricated claims, added additional federal jurisdiction. Morrison had explained something crucial during our meeting. Federal civil rights laws protect veterans as a class in housing discrimination cases. Every time Brenda targeted a military family for harassment, she was violating laws that supersede any HOA authority. "Here's what most people don't understand about fighting HOAs," Morrison said, leaning back in her chair with the confidence of someone who'd prosecuted real criminals. "When they cross into civil rights violations, they lose all legal protection. Discriminatory enforcement based on military status is a federal crime, period." The technical evidence gathering was already paying dividends. Forensic accountants had traced $400,000 in profits from forced veteran property sales directly into Brenda's personal accounts. Digital forensics teams had recovered email conversations discussing clearing out military problems from servers Brenda thought were secure. Even local law enforcement was coordinating with federal agents. Sheriff Martinez, no relation to Chuck, had been quietly documenting complaints about HOA harassment for months, building a file that federal prosecutors could use to show systematic abuse of authority. My cabin had become the center of a federal operation involving dozens of agents, prosecutors, and investigators. Motion sensors monitored every approach to the property. Digital recording equipment captured conversations from hundreds of feet away. Emergency response teams were positioned to intervene if Brenda's harassment escalated into actual violence. But the most important element was timing. Federal prosecutors needed Brenda to escalate her campaign into clearly criminal behavior while maintaining plausible deniability about federal involvement. Let her think she's winning, Morrison had advised. Desperate people make mistakes, and mistakes create evidence. Time to give Brenda enough rope to hang herself. Playing the defeated homeowner was harder than I'd expected. Every instinct screamed to fight back when Brenda escalated her harassment, but federal prosecutors needed her to cross clear criminal lines while surveillance teams documented everything. The first escalation came on a Tuesday night around 11 p.m. I was reviewing federal case files in my kitchen when the lights flickered and died. Not just my cabin, the entire end of the lake went dark. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting eerie shadows through my windows. By morning, I discovered the problem. Someone had deliberately severed the main power line feeding 4 veteran-owned properties. The damage was surgical, precise, not random vandalism, but targeted sabotage designed to look like equipment failure. The utility company's repair estimate made my chest tighten. $1,200 emergency service fee, plus another $800 for upgraded safety equipment required after suspicious damage. But here's what made my blood boil. Brenda's property, just 50 yards away, never lost power. Federal surveillance cameras had captured everything in high definition. Dale approaching the utility pole with wire cutters at 2:17 a.m. Brenda's white SUV idling nearby with its lights off, even the conversation where she directed him to make it look like old equipment failure. Agent Kim called that afternoon. Beautiful work from their perspective. Sabotage disguised as infrastructure problems, targeting only military families. From our perspective, destruction of federal property since utility lines crossed state commerce boundaries. But Brenda wasn't finished with infrastructure warfare. 3 days later, my water line mysteriously ruptured during the night. I woke to the sound of rushing water and discovered a geyser erupting near my foundation, exactly where Dale had been inspecting the previous week under the guise of checking for utility easement violations. The emergency plumber arrived at dawn, his boots squelching through mud that smelled like a mixture of earth and desperation. "Strangest thing," he said, examining the damaged pipe. "Looks like someone took a pickaxe to your main line, but they were careful hit it right where the repair would be most expensive. $1,200 for emergency service, another $800 for excavation and replacement, plus temporary water costs while the work was completed." The financial pressure was mounting exactly as Brenda had planned, except federal agents were documenting every act of sabotage with the kind of precision that would make prosecutors smile in court. Meanwhile, Brenda's psychological warfare campaign intensified. Anonymous flyers appeared throughout the neighborhood, featuring grainy photos of me with text asking, "Do you feel safe with unstable veterans in our community?" The cheap paper and smudged ink suggested desperate late-night printing sessions. My mailbox got vandalized twice more. First with "Troublemaker" spray-painted in red letters, then with "Go Home" scrawled in what looked suspiciously like Dale's handwriting federal document analysis experts were already examining from his fake inspection reports. Social media attacks started appearing on local Facebook groups. Fake accounts with stock photo profiles spread rumors about my aggressive behavior at community meetings, my suspicious late-night activities, and concerns about my stability based on my military background. But the most disturbing escalation was the business pressure campaign. Brenda's real estate connections started contacting local contractors, warning them about working with difficult homeowners who might not pay their bills or could become litigious problems. 2 suppliers suddenly required cash payment instead of extending credit. The hardware store owner, a Vietnam veteran himself, quietly told me that someone had been asking questions about my purchasing patterns, trying to build a case that I was stockpiling materials for unknown purposes. The federal response was swift and invisible. FBI financial crimes investigators began tracing the fake social media accounts back to their sources. Civil rights enforcement teams documented how the business pressure campaign constituted systematic economic harassment based on military status. Even the U.S. Postal Service got involved, since using mail to deliver intimidating materials based on fabricated claims fell under federal mail fraud statutes. Agent Kim called with updates that made me smile despite the harassment. She's checking every box in the federal racketeering manual: conspiracy, civil rights violations, destruction of property, mail fraud, even wire fraud for the fake social media campaign. We could teach a law school seminar using her tactics as examples of what not to do. But the psychological toll on my family was becoming serious. Emma started having nightmares about strangers breaking into our cabin. Sarah flinched every time a car door slammed in our driveway. The peaceful retreat we'd planned had become a combat zone where federal agents were the only thing standing between us and escalating criminal harassment. The most chilling moment came when I discovered fresh footprints around our cabin after a night when we'd been visiting Sarah's parents in town. Someone had walked the perimeter of our property, testing doors and windows, leaving muddy evidence of their surveillance in the soft earth around our foundation. Federal agents had photographs of the intruder, Brenda herself, conducting late-night reconnaissance for what prosecutors suspected would be her final, desperate gambit. The endgame began with a conversation federal wiretaps captured between Brenda and Dale on Thursday evening. Agent Kim played me the recording over a secure phone line, her voice tight with anticipation. "We need direct evidence of his instability," Brenda's voice crackled through the speaker. "Something that proves he's a danger to the community. Then we can justify emergency removal proceedings." Dale's nervous response was barely audible. "What kind of evidence?" "The kind that makes judges sign restraining orders and forces immediate property sales." Federal prosecutors had been waiting months for this moment, clear evidence of conspiracy to plant fabricated evidence. Morrison's team immediately sought authorization for what they called controlled criminal activity documentation. Translation: let Brenda commit federal crimes while recording everything. I played my part perfectly, making sure neighborhood gossips overheard me telling Sarah I'd be driving to Helena for legal consultations that weekend. The truth was more complex. I'd be meeting with federal prosecutors while surveillance teams positioned around my cabin documented whatever criminal activity Brenda had planned. Friday afternoon, I made a show of loading an overnight bag into my truck, loudly mentioning to Tom Rivera that I'd be gone until Sunday evening. Tom, who'd been quietly helping federal agents by reporting Brenda's activities, nodded sympathetically and wished me luck with my lawyer meetings. The drive to Helena felt surreal. Montana's late autumn landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, mountains painted in gold and copper, while federal agents maintained discreet surveillance of my cabin 200 miles away. My phone displayed a live security feed showing the peaceful lake where federal justice was about to unfold. Saturday morning in Judge Jamie's chambers, I watched real-time surveillance footage on a secure federal monitor. Brenda's white SUV appeared on camera at 11:47 a.m., parking behind a stand of pine trees where she thought she'd be hidden. Dale's pickup truck followed 15 minutes later, laden with what looked like construction equipment. "She's been planning this for weeks," Agent Kim whispered, adjusting the audio pickup to capture their conversation. "We've got wiretaps showing her purchasing fake drug paraphernalia and printing literature designed to make you look like an extremist." The break-in unfolded like a crime thriller. Dale approached my back door with professional lock-picking tools, while Brenda served as lookout, constantly scanning the empty neighborhood. Federal cameras captured every detail: Dale's nervous sweating, Brenda's aggressive hand signals, the careful way they avoided leaving fingerprints on door handles. Judge Jamie leaned forward as Dale forced the lock. 30 years on the federal bench, and I've never watched criminals create evidence for their own prosecution in real time. Inside my cabin, Brenda and Dale worked with practiced efficiency. Federal surveillance showed them planting items throughout my property: fake extremist literature in my bedroom dresser, counterfeit drug paraphernalia in my workshop, even forged documents suggesting I'd been making threats against HOA board members. But their biggest mistake was the conversation federal microphones captured while they worked. "Once we photograph this evidence tomorrow," Brenda whispered, unaware that federal agents were recording every word, "emergency restraining orders will force immediate property seizure. The Martinez family will see what happens to troublemakers and accept our offer voluntarily." Dale's response sealed their fate. "What about the other veterans, the ones who haven't caused problems yet?" "Same treatment," Brenda replied coldly. "Military people don't belong in family neighborhoods. We're providing a service, cleaning up communities one property at a time. Federal agents had captured systematic civil rights conspiracy in high-definition audio and video. The arrest happened as they finished planting evidence. FBI agents moved in with military precision, surrounding my cabin as Brenda and Dale emerged through the back door carrying the tools of their trade. Agent Kim called me with barely contained excitement. "Perfect execution. We've got them on breaking and entering, conspiracy to commit civil rights violations, evidence tampering, and about 6 other federal charges. Plus, everything we collected shows systematic racketeering across state lines." Judge Jamie was watching the live arrest feed over my shoulder, his expression mixing satisfaction with professional concern. "Mr. Kelly, you've just helped us document one of the clearest cases of civil rights conspiracy I've seen in 3 decades on the federal bench." But the story was far from over. Federal agents had seized Brenda's phone during the arrest, uncovering a network of similar operations across 6 states. Bank records revealed money laundering through dozens of real estate transactions. Email servers contained evidence of systematic targeting of military families dating back 5 years. Dale broke within hours, offering complete cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. His testimony revealed the scope of Brenda's network. 43 HOAs using identical tactics, over 200 veteran families systematically harassed from their homes, millions in illegal profits laundered through shell companies. As I drove back toward Pine Lake that evening, knowing Brenda was spending her first night in federal custody, the Montana sunset looked different through my windshield. Justice wasn't just an abstract concept anymore. It was federal agents with badges, prosecutors with subpoenas, and a legal system that finally had enough evidence to protect families like mine. Tomorrow would bring media attention, community reckoning, and the beginning of real change for HOAs nationwide. The federal courthouse steps in Helena had never seen a crowd like this. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward a crystalline Montana sky that seemed to promise justice. The smell of exhaust from idling trucks mixed with the crisp November air as reporters from CNN, Fox News, and 3 major networks prepared for what U.S. Attorney Morrison had promised would be a landmark announcement in civil rights enforcement. I stood beside Judge Jamie, still processing that less than 48 hours ago I'd been a struggling homeowner fighting an HOA. Now I was the key witness in what federal prosecutors were calling the largest coordinated housing discrimination case in American history. Morrison approached the podium with the confidence of someone who'd spent months building an airtight case. Behind her, Agent Kim held a thick folder containing evidence that would reshape how HOAs operate nationwide. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morrison began, her voice carrying clearly through the courthouse plaza, "today we announce a 47-count federal indictment against Brenda Thornwick and 12 co-conspirators for systematic civil rights violations, racketeering, and conspiracy to defraud military families of their constitutional housing rights." The crowd of reporters erupted with shouted questions, cameras flashing like strobe lights against the courthouse's granite facade. But Morrison wasn't finished delivering the hammer blows. Operation Clean Sweep has uncovered a criminal network spanning 6 states, targeting over 200 veteran families for systematic harassment and financial exploitation. The defendants generated approximately $2.3 million in illegal profits by forcing below-market property sales through fabricated violations and discriminatory enforcement. Behind the media scrum, I spotted familiar faces from Pine Lake. Tom Rivera had driven up with Margaret Jamie and several other neighbors who'd quietly supported my fight. Even Gladys was there, her eyes bright with the satisfaction of seeing Harold's memory vindicated. But the most satisfying sight was the federal prisoner transport van parked behind the courthouse, its tinted windows hiding Brenda during what would be her only public appearance in an orange jumpsuit. Morrison continued with prosecutorial precision. Evidence includes recorded conversations where defendants explicitly discuss targeting military problems and upgrading neighborhood demographics. We have documented over 400 instances of fabricated violations, fake inspections conducted by unlicensed personnel, and systematic financial harassment based solely on veterans' military service. A reporter from the Washington Post shouted a question that cut through the morning air. What message does this send to other HOAs engaging in similar practices? Morrison's smile was sharp as a blade. Federal civil rights laws supersede any HOA authority. Discriminatory enforcement based on military status is a federal crime with no statute of limitations. Your financial records are public, your emails can be subpoenaed, and veterans have friends in very high places. The crowd murmured appreciatively, but Judge Jamie stepped forward to add the judicial perspective that would make headlines nationwide. For 30 years on the federal bench, I've seen civil rights violations disguised as bureaucratic procedure, he said, his voice carrying the weight of legal precedent. This case demonstrates that systematic housing discrimination will be prosecuted with the full force of federal law, regardless of how it's disguised or justified. A CNN correspondent asked about the broader implications, and Morrison delivered what prosecutors would later call the mic drop moment of the press conference. To HOA board members watching this coverage, we've identified 847 similar complaints nationwide. Federal investigators are reviewing patterns of discriminatory enforcement in 23 states. If you're systematically targeting military families, protected minorities, or anyone based on class membership rather than legitimate rule violations, we will find you, we will prosecute you, and we will seize every asset you gain through civil rights violations. The courthouse steps erupted with camera flashes and shouted follow-up questions, but the legal thunder had already rolled across America. Social media exploded with #HOA accountability hashtags. Local news stations began investigating their own community's HOA practices. Law firms specializing in civil rights announced they were reviewing similar cases in dozens of states. Behind the media frenzy, the human cost was finally being acknowledged. Pete Michaels, the Desert Storm veteran who'd been forced to sell his property for $180,000, stood with tears in his eyes as Morrison announced that federal restitution would recover his losses plus damages for emotional distress. Every family that was targeted will receive full compensation, Morrison declared. Federal asset forfeiture has already seized $2.8 million from the defendants' accounts, properties, and business holdings. As the press conference concluded, I found myself surrounded by reporters asking for my reaction to seeing justice delivered. But the most important moment came when a young woman with a military spouse pin approached me quietly. "My husband's deployed, and our HOA has been threatening us with violations that don't exist," she whispered. "Who do I call?" I handed her Agent Kim's business card. "The federal government is listening now," I said. "You're not fighting alone anymore." The Montana wind carried our voices across the courthouse plaza, where justice had finally found its voice loud enough to be heard from sea to shining sea. 6 months after Brenda's perp walk made national headlines, Pine Lake had transformed into something that would have made my grandfather weep with pride, a genuine community where the smell of barbecue smoke mixed with laughter instead of whispered fears. Brenda received 18 years in federal prison and $2.8 million in restitution orders that will follow her until her dying breath. Dale, who sang like a canary to federal investigators, got 3 years and became the star witness in prosecutions across 4 states. His testimony helped break up similar discrimination rings from Idaho to Wyoming, protecting over 400 military families from the systematic harassment we'd endured. But here's what really mattered: watching Emma sleep peacefully again, no longer jolting awake at car doors slamming in our driveway. Seeing Sarah's shoulders relax as she worked in our garden, the constant tension finally melting away like spring snow. Our family had survived a federal case, but more importantly, we'd reclaimed our home. The financial justice was swift and complete. Federal asset forfeiture seized everything: Brenda's real estate empire, her personal properties, even that pristine white SUV she'd used for midnight surveillance. Every targeted family received full restitution plus emotional damages. Pete Michaels bought a gorgeous lakefront cabin with his $180,000 recovery, joking that Brenda had accidentally given him the retirement home of his dreams. The new HOA board, with me as unanimously elected president, implemented governance so transparent it could be seen from space. Every meeting streamed live online. Independent auditors reviewed our books quarterly. Most crucially, we enshrined anti-discrimination protections that would prevent anyone from ever again being targeted for their military service, race, or background. Property values exploded as national media coverage attracted families who wanted neighbors that fought for justice. Young military couples started choosing Pine Lake specifically because they'd heard about our stand against discrimination. What Brenda had tried to poison through hatred, we'd purified through inclusion. The healing culminated in our first Freedom Day celebration held annually on Brenda's arrest anniversary. The entire community gathered around tables where former enemies now shared Emma's homemade cookies and swapped fishing stories. The sound of children playing echoed off the same lake where Brenda once prowled with her clipboard of manufactured violations. But the crown jewel was our Pine Lake Veterans Scholarship, funded by federal restitution and powered by community love. We provide full college scholarships for military children who faced housing discrimination anywhere in America. Last month, I handed a scholarship check to Maria Santos, whose Army father had been harassed out of 3 different communities before finding sanctuary with us. Watching her tears of gratitude, I felt my grandfather's spirit smiling from that old dock. Our case became the legal weapon that shattered HOA corruption nationwide. Federal prosecutors referenced our evidence in 43 similar prosecutions. Law schools teach our story as the gold standard for civil rights enforcement. Even Netflix's documentary introduced millions to the reality of systematic housing discrimination disguised as community standards. The Department of Justice asked me to help draft national HOA oversight legislation that's already passed in 12 states. Sarah and I now mentor families fighting similar battles, connecting them with federal resources that exist because we refuse to surrender. Every family that calls our hotline is another victory against the Brendas of the world. This morning, I sit on my grandfather's restored dock, steam rising from coffee that tastes like freedom. Loons call across water so clear it reflects every cloud, every possibility. The dock that nearly cost me everything now hosts community fishing tournaments where veterans teach neighborhood children to cast lines and tell stories about courage under fire. The cabin's cedar walls, weathered and strong, shelter a retreat center where military families find healing among neighbors who understand that service creates bonds stronger than any HOA bylaw. The creaking sound of old wood under boots now sounds like victory instead of violation. Justice took time, took courage, took people willing to stand up and say, enough. But it came, wrapped in federal badges and delivered with constitutional authority. Your HOA nightmare could be someone else's federal case. Drop a comment sharing your worst experience. You might be surprised how many laws they broke, and your story could help another family find justice. Hit that subscribe button for HOA Stories and ring that bell because next week I'm covering the city council member who tried to steal an entire neighborhood park and how one grandmother armed with public records brought down City Hall.
Another day, another HOA drama wrapped up. If this story made you shake your head or fist pump in victory, smash that like button, share your own HOA experience below, and subscribe so you'll never miss another battle in the burbs.